Good afternoon and welcome to this final session of today's Information Literacy Conference. I'm Doris Kammradt, and I would like to introduce once again my colleagues, Erin, Kelly, and Rob. And we're very pleased to be here and share with you some of our experiences with our outreach and instruction program. All day, we have heard from many of you how you're already changing your approach to teaching and are trying out new concepts of the information literacy framework. That has also been happening at Trinity, and it started well before we even heard about meta-literacy or threshold concepts. But something really clicked for us when earlier this year we began to wrap our minds around the new framework for information literacy. Not that we hadn't also been excited when the initial set of information literacy standards came out in 2000, and we have diligently worked with them for many years. But as the information environment keeps changing, we are increasingly aware of the mismatch between the linear, skill-based approach of the standards and the complex realities of the research process we're teaching to our students. What we gradually realize in learning about the new framework is the fundamental shift in how it helps us to look at and talk about our work with students. So rather than having us implement something completely new, we feel like the framework is giving us new perspectives, new ways of seeing and interpreting what we're already doing. To illustrate this shift, allow me to take you for a moment into a frame shop. I'm sure many of you have had the experience of getting a piece of artwork framed or reframed. So there you stand and you hold up different matte colors and moldings and watch how each of them brings out a different aspect or interpretation of the piece that you're having framed. And that is very much the experience we're having with these threshold concepts, because they all help us to see something that's already there, but we see it more clearly and with more confidence. And that's what we want to share with you in our 3 presentations. Each of my colleagues will introduce one component of our research, education, and outreach program and reframe it within the new concepts of information literacy. The presentations will take about 10 minutes each, and then we will invite you to share your reflections on what opportunities you see in this framework at your institution and how it might help you to interpret something that you are already engaged in. Your questions are also welcome, and Trudy Jacobson and Tom Mackey have graciously agreed to help us answer them. And now I ask Rob Walsh to the podium for our first presentation.
Good afternoon. If it wasn't obvious, I'm Rob. And I'm going to talk about a credit-bearing course that we offered this past spring. In our course, Research Methods and Information Resources grew out of a desire to empower students at Trinity with a holistic opportunity to develop advanced research skills. So what frustrates students? What are some of their knowledge gaps? These are questions we began to ask ourselves, and we had a pretty good idea as to some of the answers. They're not always certain as to where to or how to begin a search. Their knowledge of the variety of information resources is rather limited. Every fall, I go into a senior seminar in the economics department, and I ask the students who's used EconLit, and out of 20 students, maybe 1 or 2 hands go up. And I thought they were joking the first time, but semester after semester, this occurs. Students tend to stick with the tried and true, but they're not really sure why. What database do students love? JSTOR. Right. And I ask students this all the time. What do you use? JSTOR. Why do you use it? Because, or, it's something I've used in high school. So they don't really question them. They lack the vocabulary to fully exploit the resources that are available to them. We've all seen students type in a question in a JSTOR search box or in an EBSCO search box, just like they would with Google. And all too often, they just settle. So addressing these deficiencies was the impetus of our course. Now, it's easy for us to say, as experts, that there are these deficiencies, but I also think the fact that our course filled to enrollment capacity in the first day is testament to the fact that students want a course like this. So using a flipped classroom model and designed around some of the ideas of meta-literacy, this course, which was co-taught by Erin, Kelly, and me, incorporated many of the threshold concepts that are articulated in the proposed framework. What's interesting is that our learning goals and activities, or when we're planning our learning goals and activities, we didn't even consider this notion of threshold concepts. Honestly, I had no idea what threshold concepts even were until reading an article that Trudy assigned prior to a professional development workshop she did at Trinity in January. Yet as we began to reflect on the course, we immediately discerned an overlap of the course learning goals and learning activities and the threshold concepts delineated in the new framework. While this was not deliberate, it definitely excites us that what the ACRL Standards Task Force is proposing is attuned to what we're already doing. And having experimented with these threshold concepts before the new framework has even been rolled out, we're in a pretty good place to execute the framework across our research education program. And so let's spend some time taking a look at some of this overlap between the threshold concepts and our course. And I don't have time to cover it all, but if you want to send me an email, I'm willing to share a syllabus, assignments, etc. with you. So, scholarly research evolves as a conversation over time. From the outset, this is a concept that was central to our curriculum. And an assignment on doing research in the humanities demonstrates how we integrated this concept. Students conducted research on a significant historical personage, Mark Twain or Charles Darwin. And as a team, they explored a variety of primary and secondary resources, finding both contemporary and current information about their subject. Throughout the process, they reflected on how scholars build off the research of scholars who have previously come before them. We wanted to underscore that scholars contribute individually to a collective conversation in a particular area of study, and that students are entering into the middle of this conversation. The focus of the conversation changes as scholars begin to ask new research questions. And related to this is the notion that students aren't just information consumers, but they are producers as well. Their voice inevitably becomes part of the conversation. And thus, students need to look for gaps in the research. They must think critically and ask appropriate questions, not just accept the results of a search. Students must make appropriate connections and be okay with the fact that their research questions evolve over time. With experts sharing research through social media, authority is no longer limited to peer-reviewed or scholarly sources. And I should say, I use this term expert very loosely because an expert doesn't necessarily have to be someone with an advanced degree or any degree for that matter. While we dedicated considerable time to traditional scholarly channels such as journal databases, we explored the centrality of social information in doing research for both academic and personal purposes. To introduce students to using social media for research, we devised a really simple yet fantastic assignment. Basically, students use Twitter, YouTube, Wikipedia, and Google blogs to research a given topic. They were tasked with identifying an expert and what that expert is saying, and also articulating some of the characteristics of an expert. What does an expert look like? They were also required to follow a conversation that was happening via the channel. Who's talking and what are they saying? To integrate a metacognitive component, students considered what steps they took to find the useful resource, but also how these resources could be used for a research paper. As we discuss these information channels, we ask students to think about not only how social channels might be used to disseminate research, but how the participatory nature of these channels signifies a new sense of authority. We wanted students to understand how to identify the markers of authority and know that authoritative information is not limited to journal databases, but can be manifested in less formal channels. Peer review is no longer the end-all, be-all. The exploration of social media also reiterated that scholarship can literally be a conversation. Students themselves can become active participants in this conversation, and we encourage our students to become participants in the conversation. Additionally, the lesson highlighted some of the concepts articulated under format as process. Understand that format and method are separate entities, articulate the purpose and distinguishing characteristics of various formats, and identify which formats meet particular information needs. Developing a search strategy, or strategic search, is perhaps the area in which students are least proficient. Students struggle with defining and articulating their information need. They often look in the wrong place. I remember a few years back, a student saying that he could not find any articles on the Arab Spring. And when I pressed him a little bit and asked him where he was looking for this information, he said JSTOR. Okay, well, we all know why JSTOR is not going to work, right? They don't know where to look. The information resources they search use a vocabulary that is foreign to them. Does anyone know what the major subject heading is that PsycInfo uses for gender differences? It's human sex differences. Who would have thought, right? And students don't understand that research is an iterative process, that their questions and subsequent search strategies are likely to evolve during the course of doing research. So the concept of searching being strategic was particularly highlighted during the several weeks we looked at discipline-specific research. Students gained understanding of how research is different across disciplines, how humanities research might require the use of primary sources, while social sciences research might require the use of data sources. We examined the best resources for doing research in each discipline. We emphasized the nuances of searching using different information resources, and we talked about the construction and contextualization of subject headings and how they affect the organization of information in a given resource. Consequently, students gained a keen awareness of the vicissitudes of research. They became more sophisticated searchers, moving from simple search strategies to complex ones. And they learned that there is no one-size-fits-all information tool, and that being a good researcher requires them to constantly refine their strategy. The final project that students had to do was create a video, a YouTube video that introduces their peers to a service or a resource or a space in the library. This kind of gets at what Tom said this morning about using these new channels to think about critically and use these new channels. So here's an example of a video that one of our groups put together. The videos were done by groups of 4, And this one looks at Academic Search Premier.
Yo, Kim, you see the drafts tonight? Who do you think's gonna go first?
Man, it have to go with Johnny Football, man.
He's
so good.
he's fun to watch.
You know what? Did you see the email that Professor Rodriguez sent to us?
What email?
About our paper, guy.
The history paper?
Yeah, man. It's like 7 or 8 pages, man. Like,
Yeah, I'll pull it up right now.
there it is.
2,000 words, scholarly sources? I don't even know what a scholarly source is.
Telling me. I don't know what she's
Is
talking
that
about.
like Wikipedia?
I don't know. No, it can't be. It's this thing she told me to go to like the library for. She sent me to some guy in there. It's like research librarian or something. You go online. You actually go on the Trinity College Library page.
Oh, on this page here?
Yeah, right here. So scroll down a little bit. Yep. There they go. Meet the research librarians on your right hand
You
side.
met with one of these guys?
Yeah. See, you can
Which
make an
one?
appointment for them. And I actually talked to
This one here?
No, not Doris. Yeah, that guy, Rob Walsh. Great guy. He actually taught me a lot, man. You can go meet with him, or I
Now
can
you know
show
why I
you
wanted to
the top.
play it.
Yeah, do you want to just show me just because it's due tomorrow?
All right, I'll show you. So you go over here on the left, right? And you go down to buy database titles, and he brought me to something. It was like academic, I think it was Academic Search Premier.
Alternative press, academic search for me right
Yeah,
here.
there it is. There it goes. Yeah. So you basically just go on here. You see the search bar at the top?
Yeah, there's 3 of them though. How do you even search?
Okay, so since our paper's on American Revolution, you can just type in American Revolution in the space bar. They'll give you some pretty good sources there. Yep, see? You get, wow.
But that's 35,000 results. How am I going to look through that?
Well, you see, you can go down and you can basically just you can narrow your search down, and you can put like...
So you did what, Shays Rebellion?
Yeah, I did Shays Rebellion.
Alright,
So you
I'll probably do Boston Tea Party maybe. I remember talking about that in class. That sounded kind of interesting, and I'm from Boston.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
814 results. That's pretty good, but probably still too many.
Yeah, you need to narrow that down a little bit more. You know what? Go down here on the left. He showed me something. Oh, there it is. Limit to peer reviewed. Yeah, click that.
Oh, okay.
Now you have 511.
That's pretty good. Now, didn't she say something about like scholarly articles or
Oh,
journals or something?
It was academic journals. Yeah, right there on the left. You see it?
Uh-huh.
Click on that.
100 sources. I can look through that.
You definitely can, man. That would be better for you. 35,000 is too much.
I'll say. Alright, thanks a lot, Akeem. I'm gonna go start my research now.
No problem, man.
I'll be sure to share the feedback with the students. Yet, we talk about how students love technology. Of all of our assignments, this assignment proved to be the most troublesome. Most students literally despised it, and that's putting it nicely. They found that it just took too much time. Some of the feedback we got was this is not a video making course, or I didn't know that I signed up for a video making course. So that's something we're going to consider in the future as we go forth with this course, but certainly we got some pretty good products out of it. In the end, our course signifies a paradigm shift in thinking. None of this is really that revolutionary, including the new framework itself, right? One of the analogies that keeps coming up today is something about old wine in a new casket. I don't drink, so I have no idea what that really means. But I mean, I guess old stuff repackaged as new, right? But it is a way of looking at what we're already doing in new ways. And that's exciting. People are actually beginning to think about what we've been doing and how we can change it. In a 2013 article about threshold concepts, Hoffer, Bernetti, and Townsend contend complex conceptual understanding cannot be taught in one session, but must be integrated into the broader curriculum or taught in the context of a credit-bearing course. Teaching threshold concepts requires seriously upping our game as instructors. It's the second part that really resonates with me. Teaching threshold concepts requires seriously upping our game as instructors. Our course demonstrates our commitment as instructors. While it's not feasible for all 2,500 of our students to enroll in it, many of the lessons that we learned and will continue to learn going forward can be integrated into the goals of our research education program. Our commitment to reframe our mission is evident in other areas as well. Kelly will now discuss an ethnographic project that uses insight into students' cognitive, affective, and emotional dispositions when doing research.
Thank you, Rob. How is everyone? Good? We're nearly there. We're at the end of the day, so good job. Can you all hear me from here? All right. So as Rob said, I'm Kelly Dagan. I'm the Outreach and Instruction Librarian at Trinity, and I'm going to talk to you about a partnership between the library and an anthropology course that's provided some really valuable insights for us into how students engage with our spaces, our resources, and the research process itself on our campus. So I'll talk about how this project has developed over these past couple of years, and then discuss it in light of some of the concepts in this new framework we've been talking about, and how we're trying to integrate some of the findings into our instruction and outreach program. To give you some background, ethnographic field research techniques have become increasingly popular among academic libraries as a means of finding out about how our communities function and how they engage with our programs and services. This project was partially inspired by that trend. My partners in it were Professor Beth Notar of this anthropology course and Dr. Rachel Barlow, our institutional research coordinator, who helped us to figure out how to collect, organize, and analyze our data. Professor Notar teaches this anthropology course that walks students through these ethnographic field research techniques, methods of finding out how a community functions, qualitative interviews, observations, site mapping, and other methods. And then for their final project, students have to pick a field site of study and then go out into the field and use these methods to try to figure out how it works. So for 1 year, I suggested that we use the library as the field site of study. We restructured the course to give students some exercises, giving them background on how the library functioned, invited them into the space to practice some of these techniques, and then set them loose in the library and said, okay, come up with a research question, and then come into research teams, and then come into the spaces and try to answer your research question. At the end of the year, we were able to host each of the research teams and have them present all of their findings to the library staff. This was a great experience for us in terms of student engagement, hearing from students themselves about how they perceived the library and its spaces and its tools, and how they saw their peers using the spaces and tools as well. Many of the findings weren't particularly surprising. Students want convenience and comfort. They want to be able to print everything in the universe. But we were able to integrate some of the findings into our outreach program, particularly how students viewed the library in social terms on our campus, and signage in our building was very important to them. So that was the first phase of the project. For the second phase, we thought about what else it would help us to know in order to reach out and connect and help students. And we hit upon the idea of the research process itself. We wanted to know more about what goes on in a student's heart and mind when they get a research assignment, and they have to sit down and engage with it. So for the second year of partnership, we pared down the project to a single qualitative interview assignment that we had our anthropology students complete for us. For our interview cohort, we paired up with an English 318 class who volunteered to be interviewed. We picked them in part because they were juniors and seniors, so they were further along in their research experience, and they had a fairly major research project to complete at the end of that class. Our anthropology students went through the interview script, practiced on each other, and then went out and paired up with these English 318 students and interviewed them. For the interviews, students were asked to recall a specific research experience they had had, so they could talk in concrete instead of general terms. And when we designed the script, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing not only the cognitive aspects of research, what students thought of doing, what their strategies were, but also the emotional, affective domain. How were they feeling as they went through this process? What were their emotions? And some self-reflective pieces. How did going through this research experience change how they felt about themselves as researchers or their own academic work? I wanted to share the script with you so you could see what students were asking each other in this project. And as you can see, the first few questions are cognitively based. What did you do first, next, why? What was your strategy? How did your findings or non-findings affect your direction? Did you track your progress at all? But then we get into the emotional domain. Where did you feel stuck? What parts did you dislike? Who did you ask for help? And then when have you felt successful or good in research? We also had some self-reflective pieces. If there's an ideal research experience that you really wanted to engage with, you looked forward to, what would that look like to you? And how have you developed as a researcher? How has your approach to research changed during your time at Trinity? In thinking about the new framework, this project intersects quite nicely with this need to address the whole learner when we're engaging with students, not just looking at their cognitive processes, what they know or don't know, but what they're experiencing as individuals on emotional terms. How do they feel about this process? How do they prefer to approach it? What are their methods and strategies based on their individual understandings of what's happening to them? There were 13 interviews completed, and all of the transcripts we got had very emotionally charged language. When they talked about research, they cared about this experience. It mattered to them. In students' responses, thankfully, we also heard echoes of threshold concepts, which we've been talking about all day. So along with searching as, is it exploration now? Yes, searching as exploration. There was the idea of research as inquiry, research as an iterative process in which it's exploratory and asking further questions opens up new lines of thought. This came through in what students were saying to us, particularly in response to the findings or non-findings question and how they had developed as researchers. In terms of research development, I wanted to share a quote with you from one of the students that I really like. I'll let you read through it, because she's reflecting on what she came into college thinking of research as, and then how that conception of research changed. And you can see the progression from this very mechanical, structured process of just pulling out pieces of information and slotting them into my paper and making them look nice. It's not creative, it's not meaningful to her. But as she develops in her understanding of research and her practice of it, she learns the iterative process of going out and finding the information and reading through it and using that to set her direction and move her forward and open up these lines of inquiry. And it results in something that she cares about as a product instead of just another paper. So, and using this project to move us forward in our instruction and outreach, we want to develop more opportunities for this self-reflection. Time and again, you've heard about metacognition, the importance of thinking about your own process. I got to sit down with the English 318 professor. His students were the ones interviewed, and he said he thought his students did better on their final research proposal because they'd had the opportunity through these interviews to sit down and reflect on their own research process. What do I do as a researcher? We want to make sure that we integrate that more into our teaching opportunities. And also when we talk to students about research and we're teaching research, keeping that emotional, personal domain explicit in our conversations. Telling them that as you go through this process, you're going to feel lost and confused and frustrated and anxious. And these feelings aren't markers of failure, but they're signs that you should connect with a research librarian, and we can help you work through that part of the process and those emotions. That's part of how we help as your research partners. In our outreach program, we'd love to have a lunchtime discussion with faculty members and students sharing these personal research experiences and their own research development. Just as you develop as a writer or a public speaker or a teacher, you develop as a researcher. And getting these conversations more privileged on our campus as part of the way that we talk about research, this individual development and growth, is a goal that we're aiming for. This has been a really valuable partnership for us. We look forward to continuing it with this anthropology class. We may be looking in the future at first-year students and trying to examine more what's their background experience. What are they coming into college having experience in research? What are they expecting? What do they know? What do they don't know? I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the project afterwards. You can also email me or get in touch. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who's going to talk more about our assessment program.
Good afternoon. I'm Erin Valentino, and I'm the Research Education Librarian at Trinity. For my presentation here today, I wanted to focus on ways of implementing the new standards in terms of assessment. Instead, what came out was a reflective essay on the transition from the standards to the framework. You know, I never imagined myself writing a reflective essay on information literacy competency standards. I also never imagined myself doing and being excited by assessment. But assessment has become a central element of our research education program. It also represents an area that I am very excited about expanding in terms of the new framework. As far as being reflective goes, I guess I usually don't feel like I have the time for that. Perhaps some of you can identify. I think that I want to experience for myself the promises of the framework with respect to metacognition, to take some permission to do what the framework encourages for student learners. Like many of you, I've been working with ACRL's information literacy standards for quite some time now. I actually entered the arena of academic libraries at about the same time that the standards did. So in a very direct way, they shaped my first imaginings about working with students on their research. The standards also influenced how I understood my own relationship with information as a new librarian, as I tried to weave into the hierarchical relationships among standards, outcomes, and performance indicators, and even grapple with the phrase information literacy itself. Trying to think about those relationships left me feeling like my own information processes were somehow inconsistent, disorganized, and tangled. I worked harder to be more systematic in my thinking about information and research. At Trinity, even as we have never been comfortable with the standards, they have provided a conceptual fabric for the development of our research education program and of the assessment program that guides it. Another way to say that is that the standards have made us ready for the framework. To give them their due and thank them for the great work they've done for us, the standards provide important underpinning for the new framework, which, for the moment, seems like a more comfortable garment to wear on our expedition into the information ecosystem. The fabric of this new framework seems more flexible and breathable. It accommodates parts of the body pinched by the tight and uncomfortable standards. Like many of you, we outgrew the standards a long time ago at Trinity College. Our programs have continued to grow and develop over the course of a decade, in step with the rapid growth and development of that information ecosystem. The new framework will undoubtedly provide all of us with opportunities to reimagine how our academic libraries conceive of and implement information literacy. And based on my experience at Trinity, I also know that many of us have already been weaving the fabric that makes the more comfortable, breathable shirt represented by the framework. Already within our educational programs and experiences are the patterns that will guide how we structure that fabric to achieve the right fit for each of us, and that will provide the foundation for our development of newer information literacy programs based on the framework. In thinking about your own information literacy programs, what is it that you're doing now that could best support your transition to the new framework? In my role as coordinator of Trinity's research education program, I've been pondering our connection with the framework. Most of you are thinking of similar things, I'm sure, that follow along practical as well as conceptual lines. What will be the steps for implementing a new paradigm for information literacy? What will be a reasonable timeline for this transition? How can I support the instructional team in developing their own engagements with the framework? What are the best ways to communicate to the campus community about the new framework? In lining up these practical questions and trying to codify immediate answers, I found that I was thinking of implementing the new framework with the same kind of implementation demanded by the competency standards, with their fixed hierarchies and granular outcomes. And as excited as I am about the new framework, thinking of implementing it in a competency standard kind of way, it really stressed me out. In terms of assessment, another coordinator question that I asked myself was, what are the best ways to assess all of this? I've already suggested that many of us already have the beginnings of an implementation plan and programs already in place. I'd like to share my experience developing an assessment plan for our research education program as an example, and as a move toward thinking of an implementation more in line with what the framework is offering us. It's one answer that I have to the question that I just asked you. What is it that you're doing now that could best support your transition to the new framework? A few years ago, I started rethinking the way we do assessment around student learning in the library. Under the standards, we had been relying on a pre-post test administered to first-year students who had completed library instruction. I wanted to develop something more meaningful for our program. With assessment, my fears of inconsistency and disorganization cropped up again. You know, I don't know if there's really anything worse than a librarian talking about her fears of disorganization, but I'll just keep going. As they had with the standards. I have an academic background in art history. I am not a numbers person. I can barely count. I never thought I'd be doing assessment, but I had some questions. The first I had was, can an assessment plan strengthen a library's connection with its academic community, as well as show to an external audience like an accrediting agency that its instructional programs are effective? Can assessment actually, for real, move and improve a program? The central tenet of our assessment plan is the concept of assessment as engagement. It combines qualitative and quantitative methods to assess student learning, and it interprets faculty and student perceptions of the library, the research process, and their own learning and teaching. In designing the plan, I fixated on the idea of the feedback loop. A feedback loop is a desirable systemic outcome of assessment. In a simple definition, a feedback loop occurs when the evaluation of output becomes input that provides an opportunity for self-correction or adjustment. In other words, we try something, that's the output, then we see if it works, that's the input. If it doesn't work, we try something else, that's the adjustment. In an abstract sense, a feedback loop is a kind of dialogue. It can be a dialogue between our programmatic goals and their actual outcomes. It can also be a dialogue between what we think we're communicating to our students and faculty about research and what they actually understand, and so forth. At any rate, I wanted to base our assessment plan on the idea of dialogue. For this dialogue to engage various stakeholders for the research education program, including librarians, students, and faculty, to bring them into closer conversation with the program, hence the concept of assessment as engagement. The parts of our assessment program that I think have the most potential in terms of the new framework are those that depend on dialogue and qualitative assessment. For example, our Research Education Advisory Group, there we go, includes students, faculty, and librarians in a dialogue about the role of research in their academic work. Its members serve for 2 years in general and are drawn from across the disciplines. The group meets annually. This past year, we engaged the group in a conversation about changes in the information landscape that both support and frustrate their research. At the meeting, the discussion started with small groups composed of a faculty member, a student, and a librarian, and then moved to a collective sharing of the results of that conversation. In another example, the departmental outreach project, librarians are meeting with academic departments. In these meetings, we talk with groups of faculty about the role that research plays in both their individual teaching and their departmental curricula. In both of these examples, conversation is the point of the assessment. Conversation is the sum and substance of the assessment, which then becomes the frame for the ongoing conversation. In both of these ongoing projects, the data that we collect and analyze is conversation. It is also a dominant objective in a third ongoing assessment project, a capstone assessment project. For the capstone project, we read and evaluate senior theses according to an information literacy rubric that we developed together last year. 7 research librarians use the rubric to rate theses according to a rating scale, and then these numerical data are recorded. These numerical data are important. But more than that, the point of this project is the conversation that is engendered among us librarians as we together read, evaluate, and respond to these final academic projects, or as we develop the rubrics together that articulate how we describe information literacy at Trinity. The word conversation occurs around 25 times in the 2 documents that ACRL has so far released for the framework. Actually, I counted exactly 25, but as I told you before, I really don't like to count. So I'm hedging my bets a little bit. Of course, one of the threshold concepts contained in the framework is all about conversation. In terms of what the new model of information literacy will mean for Trinity, thinking about the dynamic possibilities of the conversation motivates me. I think that our assessment program will actually form an important part of our implementation plan for the new framework. But before we begin planning and implementing, and instead of getting stressed out about how we will measure our success, we are going to take some of the permission granted to student learners in the new framework for ourselves. We are going to learn, we are going to reflect, we are going to inquire, and we are going to connect. We are going to weave a new way into a complicated, tangled, and lush information ecosystem.